Chapter 1. Ben Stevens slowly began to regain consciousness. He tried to open his eyes, but the left eye was swollen shut. He looked around the room with his right eye and noticed that his two captors had disappeared and left him for dead, or so they believed. What should I do? Ben thought to himself, as he tried to sit up on the dirty, blood-stained floor. He found his hands bound with barbed wire behind his back, and he felt as if he had been struck by an 18-wheeler. A solitary light dangled from the ceiling. Moths danced around it, playing with the light, tempting the light to burn their delicate wings. He heard music coming from the next room, low and muffled, full of bass. It sounded like that psychedelic rock song that went on forever and ever. The shiplap walls were stained with blood. Was it his blood? He couldn't remember. The air was musty and heavy in the room, while the odor of stale cigarettes and cheap perfume hung in the air like an invisible cloud. He groaned under his breath. Beneath his knees, his legs had deep gashes, and he understood why as he glanced at the broken beer bottle on the floor. He sat there in his own blood and sweat for what seemed like an eternity before he realized he had time to escape. Ben struggled to get to his feet. Every move he made was like sticking his finger in a live socket. He thought his ribs must be broken. He felt the barbed wire cutting into his wrists, tearing his flesh, warm blood dripping free from his body. He shivered as he glanced around the dank room that kept him prisoner and saw a desk to one side, a bed behind him, and an old broken chair that lay abandoned, as if it had forgotten where it needed to be. A fan sitting on the desk blew air on his face. He shivered again. The fan made a constant low humming noise. He looked at the bed anew. It was covered with a blood-stained sheet. Something was hiding under the sheet, making a basketball-sized lump. Then his eyes jumped to another lump in the shape of a cylinder. He stared at the lumps on the bed for a minute and remembered there had been a second man who had been captured. Ben tried to recall more but couldn't. All he wanted to do was get out of there. He scrambled to the door, pressed his back against it, and twisted the doorknob. It was sticky, but unlocked. Ben pushed his way through, only to find himself in a larger room. He looked around and saw no one. The ceiling fan sliced through the air, the spinning blades casting shadows around him. The fireplace crackled in the corner. Directly in front of him he saw a desk under the window, with a radio still playing that song on a low volume setting. The front door was next to the window. Ben believed his captors would return soon, given how everything was left running. He looked out the window. It was raining heavily. His time was running out. He stumbled through the room to the front door, turned his back, and twisted the doorknob in the same manner as before. The door opened, and Ben lost his balance as his bruised and bloodied legs buckled. He fell backwards onto the cabin front porch. He screamed silently in pain. The barbed wire had cut deeper into his wrists, and he bled profusely on the wood planks. Ben mustered all his strength and stammered almost drunkenly as he rose once again to his feet. He quickly looked around and staggered towards the tree line. Through the forest Ben ran and ran, but he was losing blood fast. The rain drenched his tattered clothes. He tripped on a rock and fell hard on his front. He cried out in agony. He stopped to listen. His heart was beating faster and faster. He listened again. He was sure he heard the sound of cars driving on wet asphalt. He realized the road was nearby. If he could only reach it. With difficulty, Ben rose to his feet one final time. He was covered in mud. The barbed wire continued to gnaw at his wrists as he tried to stand straight. Ben reeled forward, focusing on what he thought was the road ahead of him. He ripped his blood-stained white shirt on a tree branch, but kept going until he finally emerged from the brush. His head began to spin wildly. Suddenly, a flash of light seared his retinas. His body hit the ground. His face confronted the dark sky, and he lost consciousness one last time near the roadside.